Million words, go.
We are talking about The Handmaid's Tale from 1985, and it is about set in a near future New England in a strongly patriarchal, totalitarian, theonomic state known as the Republic of Gilead, which has overthrown the United States government. The central character and narrator is a woman named Offred, one of the handmaids, a group of women who are forcibly assigned to produce children for the commanders, the ruling class of men in Gilead. And it's written by Margaret Atwood. So let me tell you about this book. If you haven't read it, feel free to read it. It's pretty interesting. It gets a little, like, you got to really get into it just because of the way, like, the formatting of the way she writes it. Any, like, quotes in the past aren't in quotations, which are hard to realize until you're you're in it.
Yeah. Much time skip, little explanation of time skip happen.
And then you're just like there. It's kind of like stream of consciousness. And and it ends rather abruptly, the way that sometimes historical diaries do. And you should watch the show. The show's great. There's some things we like, some things we don't like about the show. But it does, like, it gets the gist and tries to do a bit more with the story than Atwood was able to do, because it's like now 5 seasons and hers is just the one book. So well, now 2. So let me tell you about it, and I'll put in the show notes when I stop the synopsis so that you can just go to my analysis parts if you want to. But I feel like everyone already knows. Like, it was hard for me to be like, I'm typing this and everybody knows what happens in Handmaid's Tale. But Handmaid's Tale takes place in the near future, as I explained before. It is America, and it is where a religious fundamentalist radical group known as the Sons of Jacob have assassinated the president and most of Congress and have enacted a coup and/or insurrection to install their own ideal theocracy. This world, inspired by reality and much in the vein of Atwood's favorite themes, is one plagued by ecological disaster. Due to nuclear weapons, pollution, and our dirty habits, the earth has become infertile, and so have humans. There's a decline in birth rates, though the government, again, much like our own right now, seem to care a bit for one specific type of baby than others, but birth rates have dropped. So there is a need for children. And in the show, it's just like that trumps everything. It's like, we just need babies, so nothing else. All of a sudden, we forgot everything else that's problem. It's kind of like they don't compile onto each other. Anyway, they want babies that are born. They want new babies because a lot of babies are being born with deformity or other illnesses. And I'm just going to table the ableism for a moment with that, because it's like, it's still a baby. Still a baby. But that's not really what they talk about. Anyway, it did remind me of pre-pandemic world. I remember one of the scariest things that was going around was H1N1, swine flu, and how it affected birds. And there was a bit of some scare going on. And that felt very Handmaid's Tale to me. And the end of the novel actually explains how we ended up in that specific pot of horrible things happening in our world. And so it even touches on just slightly political and racial issues. So the book says, the reasons for this decline are not altogether clear to us. Some of the failure to reproduce can undoubtedly be traced to the widespread availability of birth control of various kinds, including abortion, in the immediate pre-Gilead period. Some infertility then was willed, which may account for the differing statistics among Caucasians and non-Caucasians, but the rest was not. Need I remind you that this was the age of the R-strain syphilis and also of the infamous AIDS epidemic, which, once they spread to the population at large, eliminated many young sexually active people from the reproductive pool. Stillbirths, miscarriages, and genetic deformities were widespread and on the increase, and this trend has been linked to the various nuclear plant accidents, shutdowns, and incidents of sabotage that characterized the period, as well as to leakages from chemical and biological warfare stockpiles and toxic waste disposal sites, of which there were many thousands, both legal and illegal. In some instances, these materials were simply dumped into the sewage system, into the uncontrolled use of chemical insecticides, herbicides, and other sprays. Um, and you can tell that it was made in 1985, where those are some of the concerns. And we live in a world that's like significantly more concerning than that. Um,
Mhm.
Also, AIDS is it's not on the way out, but it isn't as fatal as it had been. People can live for a very long time with AIDS now, but
Mhm.
instead we have monkeypox, and we don't know what that's doing. So
Yeah.
there's always something.
COVID,
We
other
got
things,
COVID,
yeah.
we got monkeypox, we got things going on out there. Um, we do have like nuclear waste. We have clean coal, quote unquote. Like, just,
Yeah, that
yes.
ridiculous car commercial that's like, "We're an eco car," and I was like, "What does that mean?"
No. Yeah. We do have like we don't have overpopulation, but we do have a lot of population, and that means we have to feed a lot of people, which means that we have a lot of animals, which means they're giving out a lot of gas. It's a lot. The environment's in trouble even more than it was in 1985.
Mhm.
So, completely valid. And also, all of those issues mentioned about the birth rates declining, including the just simple choice that nobody wants kids right now because the world sucks in so many ways. We don't want babies. And
Yeah.
now, currently, our government's trying to take even that away. It's not even just like if you accidentally get pregnant, now they don't even want you to not be able to get like
Yeah.
what are we doing,
Pop 'em
Gilead? It's
out.
happening right now.
Yeah.
But this new world, Gilead, places white Christians, cis men at places of power. Hmm. What a magical, mystical world this is. In Gilead, women are categorized. They're not allowed to read, write, or do much of anything. Some of them are allowed to garden. Some of them are allowed to go shopping with not their money.
Mhm.
They don't have jobs, with the exception of the serving class, Marthas. They can't have their own money or their own jobs in those things. They're stripped of their rights and privileges, and they live only to serve the men.
Mhm.
Uh, what an idyllic world, right? Our protagonist, Offred, or June in the show, I can't remember if she ever says her name in
I
the
don't
book.
remember it being stated, yeah.
Yeah, because I know at the end she says that Nick called her by her name, but that's what she says. He
Mm.
called me by my name,
Mhm.
not what her name was. So
Yeah.
Offred is a handmaid. Women that were divorced pre-Gilead, have never been married, and are fertile are handmaids. Some even are labeled gender traitors for being queer. These women are forced to serve the men in power. Their names are that of the household's patriarch. So her name is of Fred. These women have one purpose: to bear children for these powerful and important men. And as Offred explains, we are two legged wombs, that's all, sacred vessels, ambulatory chalices. Once a month, the handmaids are forced to participate in a cult practice of state sanctioned rape, mirroring the biblical story of Rachel, who gifted her husband her handmaid. Yeah. Gifted her husband her handmaid Bila to use as a wife and bear children. Use as a wife, not be his wife. Okay?
Mhm.
And bear children. And it says, and she gave him Bila, her handmaid, to wife, and Jacob went in unto her. And that is from Genesis 30, 3 through 5. Um,
Cool.
so I actually was confused. Like I think I mentioned this in the when we did our with the show version. There's a separate story where there's like this one couple that are like old. I think it's Abraham, and God's like, I'm gonna give you children, and they like keep trying, and it never happens. So they're like, I think he means you need to sleep with my maid to have kids. And then God's like, that's not what I meant. He like gets mad at them. And then they cast out that kid, by the way. So that's fun. Um, the
Yeah.
Bible.
The
We
Bible's interesting. It's
pick
doing.
and choose which parts of the Bible we're gonna pick here. Handmaids wear red dresses and white bonnets. That's the distinct things that you see. You see that everywhere, even in places it shouldn't be in our current world, like in
Yeah.
weddings. There are the commander's wives who wear blue. They have some semblance of power, being married to the controllers of the country, but they have failed at their womanly duty, like the only thing that they're good for, and they are unable to give birth. I want to say that is the statement of Gilead, not me. It's like
Mhm.
women are more
More
than,
than
we're
their
not just
wombs.
machines.
Yeah.
Anyway, they don't have any rights either, and are also traumatized by this new world. But like white feminists today, these wives have worked to uphold the powers of men, uh, because they also kind of get some power from it.
Yeah.
So it's like, why mess it up? Some of
They
them
get to
even,
also oppress for treat.
yeah, they get to press for tree. Exactly. They get to have just a little bit of power, so
Mhm.
that like they're not at the bottom, so they feel good. Um, they're not allowed to read either and are reduced to the mundane task of knitting. And Offred even explains that this practice could be pointless, suggesting the knitted pieces could be later unraveled so that the yarn could be used again. So it's like they think they're knitting scarves for the men on the front line of the war, and then they just unravel them, hand them back the
Be like,
yarns,
"Do
and
that
knit
again."
again. I think it's very funny. I'm sorry. And then, worst of all, they also have to participate in the state sanctioned rape of the handmaids by their own husbands. They are also a part of the process. And there's a point where, when it's happening, where Offred wonders to herself, like, who has it worse? Like, obviously, she has it worse, but
Yeah.
like that the wife does not have it easy.
Mhm.
Especially if she is indoctrinated into this ideology, like she must also bear the weight of failure, that she can't do that for her husband and has to let this other person do it. Like, if you think that's all you're worth and that's all God wants from you, you really messed up. That can't be good to live with.
Yeah.
So there's like some sympathy for even the wives, though they're not like, it's, we see them, we see women
Yeah,
just like that out there.
yeah, you can acknowledge that they don't have it easy, but that they're also a problem.
Yes, exactly. There are Marthas. This is a title, and they are, as I mentioned before, servants of Gilead. They are either too old or, for other reasons, barren. Still, they are of use and made into maids and cooks for the house, and they wear green. The aunts are older women who train and indoctrinate the handmaids. They believe in the future and see it as their purpose to explain the importance of the handmaids, to protect them and brainwash them. Their power is reminiscent of a certain social experiment in prisons where they like let some of the inmates become like the guards, and they would like abuse that power. And
Oh,
it was just
yeah.
like, aren't people like awful? I think it was like the
It's like a
Philadelphia.
yeah, it's also like a common thing that they do to better oppress people. They'll like recruit communities of the oppressed group to act as hands of the oppression.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, think about like Uncle Tom,
Mhm.
right? Or uh, there was that experiment in the high school where it was like talking about like showing them about Nazi Germany, where
Mhm.
they made like all the blue-eyed kids be important,
Mhm.
and they started like attacking the brown-eyed kids or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, they'd be like that. But in the book, they say, as the architects of Gilead knew to institute an effective totalitarian system. That's a tough one for Elmo. Uh, that's a big one for Elmo. All right. Totalitarian. Woo! All right. As the architects of Gilead knew, to institute an effective totalitarian system, or indeed any system at all, you must offer some benefits and freedoms, at least to a privileged few, in return for those you remove. When power is scarce, a little of it is tempting.
Mhm.
And this is what the scholars say in the end about the aunts, because there's scholars who like found her tapes in the end.
Mhm.
There's also the Econo wives, who wear red, blue, and green stripes. They're the wives of like the lower ranking, less important men who are expected to fulfill all the roles of the women listed above. So they're the Marthas, the wives, and the handmaids. And they just, the one aunt says like, like one day there will be no Econo wives because, we'll have wealth in the country. Like that's not how
Mhm.
war works, babe.
It's also not how
Um,
capitalism works.
yeah. The novel is Offred's tale. She explains in pieces her experiences of now and how we arrived in this world, into this point of time. She is currently in her third assignment, her third house, where she is being a handmaid, and there is this fear of being labeled an unwoman for being unable to to bear a child, and it sits heavily on her conscience. On women are sent to the colonies, forced to clean up the toxic waste humanity has left behind. We learn later that Offred's activist mother has been sent here. Women unable to have children, gender traders who are infertile, and other problematic women are sent here. It is, in essence, a death sentence, death by work camp. We learn of the small ways the world changed around Offred. Like the slow way that she started to notice that things were going awry. Like there's a moment where her baby is stolen in a shopping center. It's a little more dramatic in the show. It's like kind of just offhandedly mentioned. And again, she feels like, and it makes sense, but she feels bad for the lady who like tried to take her kid. Her rights are slowly stripped away, and we get to see those in chunks throughout her story. And there were many warning signs, but no one made moves to stop it. In the book, it says, ignoring isn't the same as ignorance. You have to work at it. And so everyone was actively ignoring what was happening. It's the frog. And the water's heating up real slow. The commander, Fred, she's Offred, asked to see Offred outside of the ceremony, and this is something that's illegal and dangerous, but they do it nonetheless. And meeting in the library late at night, they play Scrabble and talk. Again, she's not allowed to read, so it's really exciting to see letters. Even when they don't make up sentences. Offred is given small favors and is expected to serve the commander outside of her role of handmaid. This includes kissing him like she means it, wearing really old lingerie, and he slowly shares information about his unhappy relationship with his wife, Serena Joy. And when he gives her this lipstick and lingerie, he brings her to a government-run brothel called Jezebel's. And it's here that Offred sees her friend Moira once again, who was like her best friend from before times, that she also saw in the training center and didn't know where she was. And apparently she had broken out of the Handmaid's training facility and was sent to Jezebel's as a punishment. She's also a gender traitor because she's a lesbian and therefore condemned to that. We, in the book, don't ever get to know what happens to Moira. Offred envisions that maybe she burns it all down. She finally gets like this justice. She does something, but it really is just wishful thinking. Because it's very unlikely that that's what happens. While thinking that her husband is infertile, Serena Joy suggests Offred sleep with Nick, the house's servant, and later the two continue the affair on their own. This gives Offred some semblance of sexual control and even just control of her life, period, and she believes herself to be pregnant. Serena Joy learns of Offred and Commander's relationship, and later the secret police, known as the Eyes, arrive to take Offred away. Nick tells her to trust him and go with them, that they are Mayday, a resistance group, but not knowing if Nick is also an Eye or a member of Mayday resistance, she reluctantly goes, and it leaves the readers unaware of her fate. And the last chapter is just some guys talking about it. Like,
it's just like historians.
Like, we don't know what is good or bad. Like, we don't know what happened.
Yeah, can we trust the narrator? I don't know.
It's like, yes and no, because she wasn't like she painted herself as the best person. So one of the biggest things about this book that we definitely felt even stronger after reading the Earthseed series is that there really is a big lack of intersectionality, whether that's race, sexuality, trans issues, so like race, gender, sexuality, there's just not a lot. It's very dismissive. She speaks from what she knows. So let's unpack some of the things in the story and where it may fail. So the world of Gilead is truly terrifying and awful. Yes. The real horror, however, is that none of it is impossible or made up. It's all based on real things that occurred and continue to occur in this world. Atwood said herself, nothing went into it that has not happened in real life somewhere at some time. The reason I made that rule is that I didn't want anyone saying, you certainly have an evil imagination. You made up all these bad things. I didn't make them up. The thing about The Handmaid's Tale in Gilead is that, though it's not new, it is a world in which these horrible tragedies are happening to a specific demographic of women now. Like,
Mhm.
that's what the big thing about Gilead is. Though we don't live in Gilead now, many of the experiences and traumas shown in the novel are experienced every day and historically by women of color, differently abled folk, and the queer population.
Yeah.
It's important to note that Atwood set out to tell a story about a specific experience, that of the white woman. And in the novel, Offred even hears a TV news report that explains how the children of Ham, which is a term from biblical precedent that was used to justify slavery, were being shipped out to the homelands in the West. This was because Atwood aimed to explore not a patriarchal hellscape, but one that was founded in white supremacy. Um, not only a patriarchal hellscape, but one that was founded in white supremacy.
Mhm.
It's an important choice. It certainly leaves one wanting, as I'd like to have heard from someone other than Offred about these experiences, but then it wouldn't have been The Handmaid's Tale. It would have been those other people's tale. Um, as explained in our last episode, Atwood works hard to shy away from speaking on narratives and experiences that she herself doesn't understand or experience. Um, this is why, instead of including trans or BIPOC experiences explicitly in the story, these communities are simply written away,
Yeah.
which can be a benefit to some degree because she's not out here trying to say stuff that she shouldn't be saying.
Mhm.
But you can also ask, that's a big thing. It's like we just ask people to talk about things.
Mhm.
But these characters are written away either as gender traders sent to the colonies or BIPOC women sent to the West. This allows her to explore the horrible world of Gilead from the safe point of view of a white woman. It acknowledges the white supremacy without ever actually addressing it completely.
Mhm.
As if that would be like the only answer. Like we could just like it makes sense that Offred wouldn't know what happened to those people and that she wouldn't care.
Yeah.
Like that there is like for all the horrible that's happening to her, it has to be so significantly worse in the West. Not talking about it.
Mhm.
That part isn't there. In the show, the executive producer Bruce Miller worked hard to intentionally add BIPOC actors to the cast, which sounds good in theory. And his reasoning, he explained, was that I made the decision that fertility trumped everything, Miller goes on to say. Also, honestly, what's the difference between making a TV show about racists and making a racist TV show? Why would we be covering the story of Handmaid Offred rather than telling the story of people of color who got sent off to Nebraska? He felt that the answer to that question was to simply have colorblind casting. He casted Orange is the New Black Samira Wiley as Offred's best friend Moira, as well as changing Offred's family into a mixed race one, her husband a black man and her daughter mixed. However, the answer I thought made the most sense would not be to remove the white supremacist threat entirely, but instead do exactly as he suggested, which is tell the story of people of color who got sent off to Nebraska. I
Yeah.
still want to know. And by including a black Moira, who is now the sassy black friend, best friend stereotype, another problem, but not acknowledging the effects of a black handmaid, like in what they would experience, is ignorant. Would a black handmaid be as desired as a white one in Gilead? Furthermore, how would Offred's husband be treated in a world like Gilead, a land where he also doesn't have any power. He's reduced to a time in which America had been great, so great that he wouldn't have had property, autonomy, or rights.
Yep.
And that's not really listed at all. Like he's like, first of all, in the show, the first character we know is dead. Black man. That's cool. That's fun.
Mhm.
But he just saved it. He fixed it because he colorblind casted it. Anyway, this attempted modernization of the world fails to acknowledge the true horrors of our actual reality. It
Mhm.
ignores the America we already have that is built upon the bodies of Black and Indigenous people. The show dismisses our racist systems, reducing the problems purely to that of gender. As if that's it. Which is like kind of how she lives her life, kind of how she writes things sometimes.
Mhm.
And for a world so heavily influenced by eugenics, it is completely missing some of those core concepts of eugenics. Eugenics was founded here in America. That's what
Mhm.
inspired Hitler. We did. And
Yeah.
mostly used as an excuse to harm Black and brown bodies and queer bodies and just differently abled bodies. In our episode where we interviewed the director of Belly of the Beast, we discussed the forced sterilization of Black and brown women in our incarceration systems. We already live in Gilead. It just doesn't look the way that you think. We are all the frogs softly boiling in the pot. The book wants us to wake up before that reality affects the white women too. It's
Yep.
really the end. So
say it a bunch in my section.
I'm gonna keep going though.
Yeah.
The decision to send the Black folks away is intentional. It's a deliberate act that seems incredibly plausible. In a Nerds of Color article by Shannon Gibney titled Race, Intersectionality, and the End of the World, The Problem with the Handmaid's Tale, they explain the children of Ham discussed in chapter 14 of the novel can be understood as a revival of the American colonization society dream. The idea, warmly supported by white abolitionist luminaries from Thomas Jefferson to Harriet Beecher Stowe to Abraham Lincoln, that the best way to deal with Black people when you hate slavery a little bit more than you hate slaves, to paraphrase Toni Morrison, is to ship them back to any random place on the continent of Africa or perhaps to a Caribbean island. Just like, instead of reparations and giving them money because we brought them here and we harmed them, just send them away and then they're not our problem anymore.
Yeah, if you don't have to look at the problem, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, we just free them, we send them away. We don't have to actually do anything.
Yeah.
And it's a gift. They're going to thank us because they're somewhere else. Okay. Ultimately.
Also, Nebraska isn't either of those places.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
But continue.
Like, if anything, they probably would send them to like Puerto Rico. Because like we send all the things we don't want there. And we won't let them go. Anyway. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, one of the biggest issues I have with this book and Atwood's lens is how insular it feels. After reading something as complex as Octavia Butler's Earthseed series, it is hard to imagine this finite, minimal experience of a white woman in a white man's world. For all the research and inspiration Atwood did for this book, we as readers are denied the full picture of her dystopia. It ignores the real-world tragedies that BIPOC women, differently abled, and queer folks experience right now. Furthermore, Offred is not a hero, nor is she a feminist. For her work that's like been, lobbied as this feminist tale, it is absolutely not. We actually discussed last week how Margaret Atwood was hesitant to label her work as being feminist. Even the show's star, Elizabeth Moss, who plays Offred, refused to acknowledge the show as feminist, although she has problems herself for being a Scientologist, but we also covered that in our Handmaid's Tale episode. But that's because the word feminist is seen kind of as a dirty word. It's misunderstood and changed into something vicious and hateful. It is equated with misandry. Moss's Offred is a bit feminist, though it's reluctant, like the actress. She has more attitude and power, refusing to let the bastards keep her down. But the novel's Offred is very much already down and stays down. Doesn't want to ever get up. She finds solace in small moments of her own. She smears butter on her skin after the ceremony, or she tells her story to someone. Because when we tell stories, we're telling someone after all. We're not just speaking to ourselves. So Offred is simply a survivor, not a fighter, which, to be clear, is totally acceptable. Life is really hard, especially in Gilead, and simply surviving is good enough sometimes. Totally get it. But as a protagonist, it leaves much to be desired. She is given multiple opportunities to flee or fight, and yet she remains stagnant. She is lousy with privilege. And with history, we are sometimes left with unremarkable stories. And that's what we get with Offred. There's also this big difference in how she reacts to her friend Moira coming out to her in the novel versus how Offred reacts to of Glenn coming out to her in the show, that labels her as less than an ally. At first, she is uncomfortable, assuming Moira must be in love with her. And not until Moira confirms that this is not the case does she ease back into her friendship. And she also explicitly defines Moira's sexuality as a choice, which is grossly inaccurate. But Offred is also a product of her time. And again, not a hero. She's not like this revolutionary hero, which again, that's kind of like how it works. Anyway, this whole like misunderstanding of the word feminist is why some people are, leaning more towards what is it, eco-feminist, Kat? Or womanist.
Okay.
Because like people just hear feminist and they think of something else.
Evil.
I was like, that's not what that is. It's probably equality. Like, we just want to also have rights. Is that okay? Like, excuse me, is it okay if, like, I decide what happens to this vessel that I'm in?
No.
My whole life? No?
They say no.
Right.
Say,
well,
no.
Never did I feel empowered by or enraged for Offred in the novel. I was disgusted by the world around her, but I could frankly not care less about her specifically, which is
Yeah.
why I appreciate the show, which allows us to step outside her small world. We get to know the other handmaids, the wives, and those in power. And just really have liked to also look at the places in the West. I think
Mm-hmm.
we're really missing a really big part of what's going on, because I bet the reason that Offred was even able to get out, if she got out, was because there was probably revolutions in the West. Like, there's probably that happening. Like, why? Anyway,
Yeah.
because that's how that works. Like, that's what happens.
Well, yeah,
The
because
women,
all of her ways of out were just other people doing it for her. Like
yeah.
she was just like, okay, I'll go along. That sounds good.
Like, she literally, it didn't take until she had literally no other choice. Like, the
Mm-hmm.
black car was there to take her away, and that's the only reason she was like, well, I guess I have to go. Like, she didn't actually have a choice. The choice was like kill herself, unalive herself, or go in the van,
Mm-hmm.
join the van. We don't know what happened to her, but that's it.
Yeah, and this is
It
about the book
wasn't.
specifically. I know it does
Yeah,
go a little different in the show.
it
Stuff
does. Yeah, it just
happens,
goes
but
to yeah, but in the book
blah, blah, blah.
specifically, that's how it ends.
Yeah.
But I want to also talk about why we lose when we don't include us all in
Mhm.
this story, which is, believe it or not, there's more than just what I was saying. And though I believe the decision by Atwood to not speak on the experiences of women or people outside of her own lens, I can also see the negative impact this can have on the effect of the story. Again, we talked last week about you having power with your pen.
Mhm.
I can, yeah, you have power with your pen. You could use it. You can
Yeah.
also like now highlight things. Anyway,
Also, like,
my
use your
last
privilege to uplift other people and let
exactly.
them say words.
Yeah, add to it. Like your testaments could, I don't know, I haven't read them yet, but
They let
we'll
you
see.
publish 50 books. You could have let somebody else do one with you.
Yeah, Octavia didn't get to do that.
Yeah.
By lacking an intersectional approach, we are uplifting and placing value on a specific type of woman and feminist. We're telling them that this one is the one that matters. And with this tale, we're told that the world hasn't gone bad until it has reached those specific women. It ignores the complexities of feminist issues. In an article on an Injustice magazine by Julia Marsiglio titled Feminism Must Be Intersectional or It's Just an Arm of White Supremacy, they go on to say, in summary, when we are centering the concerns of women, by definition, that is intersectional. Otherwise, we are simply centering the concerns of a group of women. We can certainly talk about the unique concerns certain women may have, such as disabled women or indigenous women. But the idea that we can first elevate white women and then worry about other women is simply an arm of white supremacy and has led to untold atrocities. This attitude is dangerous. It needs to be left in the 20th century. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's again, it's this like equating feminism with misandry, wrong. Also thinking feminism doesn't include a vast majority, like we make up half of the population of the entire world, and not,
Mhm.
and like a sliver of that is white people. Like what are you like, what are you doing?
Mhm.
So despite its incredible impact on our current conversations around women's rights, The Handmaid's Tale is lacking. Without the intersectional perspective, we are robbed of the whole story. It isn't enough to say these women and people were sent away. We need to explore more of why. Atwood, as brave and brazen as she is, should be able to look white supremacy and the patriarchy in the face and call it out for what it is, the true villain. As a white woman feminist, she has the ability to do that. As an ally, she should. You wield such power with that pen to call out the oppressive forces by name. And I've often done that, or like at least taking credit for doing that. Imagine
Mhm.
what we could do with that. The people we could rally. Even now, with white women showing up to Congress in full handmaid's garb, would be significantly more powerful if they knew who they should be fighting and fighting alongside, and if they knew that they should have been fighting this whole time. The last quote in this book is this: as all historians know, the past is a great darkness and filled with echoes. Voices may reach us from it, but what they say to us is imbued with the obscurity of the matrix out of which they come. And try as we may, we cannot always decipher them precisely in the clear light of our own day. But we can, if we as a collective voice share these stories. The past is full of echoes, and luckily, we have an ability to shine a light into the darkness, to reveal them, to combat them head on. But to do that, we have to acknowledge them and fight them. together.
Yeah. Yeah, you did it. Look at you did it.
Round of applause.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm probably going to repeat some of the stuff you said and just say it similarly but slightly different just because I went on a tangent in my section. I was like, rage. Realistically.
It's fair.
Yeah.
It's an angry time.
Yeah, it's an angry time. And as I said, it's not at Atwood specifically. It's just more so of what people do with the work she's created.
Mm-hmm.
What they do with the existence of it as if it is the most important only story that ever has existed, and is the only one that matters.
Yeah,
so that's
stand your ground, you know?
Yeah, that's more the rage.
That's just kind of like history though too, right? It's like we are so caught up in like 5 stories.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, wait, hold on, there's all these stories happening. And everyone's like, no, we're gonna look at this one.
And white feminists being the worst, there's a very long historical precedent for that, which I will touch on, but it happens all the time where they just be doing the most in the most irritating and least considerate and most self-serving way.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Where they're like, I'm the one that matters. No one else matters. Only me.
Yeah, like a right to vote.
Yeah, and I'm going to push people down so that the zombies can get you, and then I'll go run free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For whose independence is Independence Day, right?